Hello everyone, my name is Kitty and I'm here today to share with you my process on how I made a Silicone Baby Yoda doll. I have wanted a Silicone Baby Yoda or the child since I saw the first episode of The Mandalorian, and now that the second season is out, I just knew I had to go for it. I am an amateur and I'm very inexperienced when it comes to making things out of silicone or mold making. So there was definitely some highs and lows with this project and I had to do a lot of troubleshooting. Overall, I did find this project very time consuming, exhausting, and expensive. So please keep that in mind if you decide to embark on this journey for yourself. But I do hope by sharing my process, it might be easier for you and perhaps you can make one for yourself. So let's get started. So I started by assembling my 3D printed pieces with hot glue, and I made sure to kind of sculpt that hot glue and fill in all of the cracks on the 3D printed figure. Now my first attempt at making a mold was very unsuccessful, but I'm going to show you what I did anyways. Essentially, I just built a mold box and created a pour spout out of clay and then did sort of a dump mold technique. Unfortunately, my 3D printed figure was very buoyant and something I did not expect, and actually became unattached to the clay pour spout, and the whole thing just was a huge failure. But luckily I was able to salvage that mold. I cut it up into little pieces and I was able to use it for my second attempt at creating a mold for the Baby Yoda. So this is about the moment where I realized my Baby Yoda figure is buoyant. And initially I tried to push it back down into the mold, but after a lot of struggle, I finally come to peace with that. This mold is ruined, there's air bubbles in it, and I have to start over, and I was just so grouchy. So for my second attempt, I cut the Baby Yoda figure out of the mold and reassembled him with hot glue. And I built my second mold box. Of course, I lined the whole mold box with tape. That way the mold won't seep in and distort or ruin the cardboard. And when making your mold or silicone pour, I recommend using a packing tape. I had a lot of success with this brown packing tape. I believe I read somewhere that duct tape can stretch out and warp, and sometimes it can affect the curing of your mold or silicone. For my second mold attempt, I decided that I wanted to make a two-part mold, so I marked a halfway point on my figure and gave it a light coating of the ease release. Next, I buried the back half of my figure in a sulfur-free clay because I wanted the pour spout to be on the back side of my figure. I also added a few more cardboard walls, that way I didn't have to waste too much mold star. And this is how he should look when you're ready for your first pouring of Mold Star. Like I mentioned earlier, I cut up into pieces my first failed mold, and I'm going to be sprinkling that into layers of Mold Star. So I start with an initial pour of that Mold Star 15, and then I very carefully sort of Tetris piece in some pieces of old mold. This is a great way to sort of displace some of that Mold Star, and also not waste any old mold. Because this mold is so big, I think using some pieces of old mold very carefully is cost effective. Of course, as you're adding in the pieces of old mold, you want to be very careful that all four sides of it are covered with that fresh pouring of Mold Star 15. That way you can get a complete cure on it. So this bit does take a lot of time and you have to work very carefully. You want to be sure that your old mold is completely surrounded on all four sides by the Mold Star 15. And you want that fresh Mold Star 15 to be touching your figure directly. That way you can have as much detail as possible. As you can see, I work fairly slowly and in layers. That way the layers of Mold Star 15 will thicken up and be able to support the weight of the old mold as I go. I actually saw this idea from a video Steve Ferreira made about 2-part molds, and watching that video made me feel so relieved. I was initially really messed up about having wasted my first pour of Mold Star 15 on that failed first mold, but seeing how he utilized old pieces of mold with his new molds made me feel really relieved knowing that I hadn't wasted all this money. After completing my layering process, I pour that last top layer of Mold Star 15 and let it even out. After a full cure, I go ahead and break apart my mold box and remove the clay and sort of clean up any flashing from my mold. Next, you're going to give your figure and mold a very generous couple of layers of ease release. You're going to want to use your finger or a brush to make sure you massage it into the mold, and it should feel pretty waxy. If there was a part of the project I could redo, it would be this. I wish I had added even more ease release because there was definitely fusing of the top and bottom layers later on. But once you're ready, you can add the pour spout to the back. I put my pour spout on the back of Baby Yoda. That way it will be very easy to trim and cover up down the road. And using cardboard and clay, I reconstructed my mold walls and started layering again Mold Star 15 and old pieces of mold to create the back piece of my mold. After you've finished your final pour, you can go ahead and let it cure for the full amount of time. And once ready, you can break apart your mold box and remove any clay. I trimmed any extra flashing and then started to open up my mold, the top and bottom layer. Unfortunately, there was a lot of fusing, and again, this is where I wish I had added more of that ease release. So I had to very carefully take my box cutter and cut apart the mold. It turned out okay, but again, it would have been better if I had more ease release. Once your mold is opened up, you can remove the figure inside and start by applying more ease release very carefully to every nook and cranny on the inside of your mold. Again, you're going to want to take a brush or your finger and sort of rub it into all of the crevices until it feels waxy. And now we can start mixing the silicone for our Baby Yoda. I am using Dragon Skin 10. I want it to be very soft and stretchy, and yet stiff enough to hold up the weight of his ears and body. I start by pouring half a glass of part B, and then mixing in my Silk Pig colors. I started with a little green, and I ended up adding white and some yellow for sort of a pastel apple green color. Of course, mix in slowly, and you will be able to find a color you like. After mixing in your Silk Pig, you can add part A. Once my silicone is all mixed, I start pouring it into the mold, being very careful to add it to the toes and fingers. And then I start pouring it into that pour spout on the back. As I'm pouring, I'm sort of tilting my mold and tapping it just to work out any air bubbles that might be trapped in there and to hopefully break any surface tension on the mold. Once your silicone has had full curing time, we can open up the mold and start removing our Baby Yoda figure. I am very careful when using my box cutter to trim if there's any fusing, and of course sort of massage the fingers and toes and ears out as you go, since there might be a little bit of sticking. After removing my figure, I realize that there's been a little bit of flashing, so I go ahead and start trimming it down. And I also very carefully cut the pour spout off the back of my figure. Then I kind of do what I call Baby Yoda plastic surgery. So I had enough dragon skin to pour 2 Baby Yoda dolls. Unfortunately, both pours had a few flaws in them, like air bubbles. So what I did was I mixed up a small batch of silicone and color matched it to my doll. And then using sort of a butter knife and pins, I reconfigured parts of my Baby Yoda doll that were a little messed up, sort of reconstructing the fingers and filling in any air bubble holes. Next, it was time to add my eyes. I purchased these beautiful glass eyes from handmadeglasseyes.com. I believe there is also an Etsy account if you want to purchase there. And what I did was I very carefully cut out sort of the eyeball area of my Baby Yoda dolls, going a little bit at a time and checking to see if the eyeball would fit. And after you cut out enough silicone, I inserted the eyes. I, of course, purchased a smaller and a larger pair of eyes. I wasn't sure what would suit the Baby Yoda dolls better, so I got one of each. Of course, if you do overcut too much, you are always able to add in a little more silicone, let it cure, and then come back and try reattempting the cut. In the end, I think I preferred the smaller 30mm eye, but those glass eyes added such a lifelike touch to my doll. After inserting the eyes, I went ahead and constructed a simple pattern consisting of dress, sleeve, and rounded collar for my doll. I made a second dress for the other doll with a straight collar, and I'll show you later. And here's what the pattern looks like. You can also cut the collar as a straight rectangle. Then, using some fabric I had on hand, I created the little gown for Baby Yoda. I used a fleecy white fabric and some brown fabric. You're also able to add snaps for an easier on-off of the dress. Next, I cut out 2 sleeves, 2 cuffs, 4 pieces for a lined collar, and a front and back of the dress, and then put it all together and assembled it. Here I am flipping it inside out, and then it's going to go on my dolls. Please let me know if you want more detailed instructions how to create the dress. Here you can see my left doll has a little bit more of a rounded collar and the larger 40mm eyes. My doll on the right has the smaller 30mm eyes and then a straight collar. So as you can see, I was able to get 2 pours of my silicone and make 2 Baby Yoda dolls. This one has the smaller eyes, the 30mm glass eyes, and his collar is actually just made from a rectangle strip of the kind of fluffy fabric. So his collar is a little bit different and the eyes are a little bit smaller, but I do really like him. Of course, in his pour, his flaws were that he had a big air bubble on the back of his head, and one of his fingers got a little mushy. So after I poured it, I cleaned it up a little bit. I filled in this bubble with some extra silicone and sort of smoothed it over, did sort of a little reconstructive surgery on the finger, and honestly, you can't tell. I was very proud of the way I was able to sort of fix those flaws with the pour. Perhaps my mold needed some more venting spaces for air bubbles to be free, but I think a lot of that just comes with more experience and knowing what molds need. So yeah, that is this one. He was actually my second pour. He has the smaller eyes and then the rectangle collar. And this one here is my first pour. He has the larger glass eyes, I believe the 40mm, and he has a little bit more of a rounded collar, sort of the pattern that I show in the video. And I think I made his sleeves a little bit longer too, so that they'd have sort of this like scrunch up effect. I don't know. When I poured him, oh my goodness, his little back toes right here, they didn't pour at all. So what I did was I cut some triangles out of some extra silicone. It was silicone from sort of the pour spout on his back, and I cut and shaped them into sort of these little back toes, and using pins and applying a thin layer of silicone, I reattached them to the heel and finally added 1 layer of silicone over top. And I believe he had an air bubble on his ear here. Again, I just sort of filled it in with some silicone, used sort of a plastic knife to scrape away the excess and try to make it smooth. And I'm not sure you can tell that much. I think it turned out pretty nice. Again, it's very hard to say. I mean, his eyes do look bigger, but I think it really is more of a personal preference if you like the 30mm or the 40mm glass eyes. But I am telling you, those glass eyes made such a huge difference. It made it so much more lifelike. The other thing I really like about these silicone dolls is that I used the Dragon Skin 10. I wasn't really sure. I wanted a shore hardness that would be soft enough so it'd be movie and stretchy, very lifelike, but also stiff enough that it would be able to hold up the weight of his ears, not be so droopy, if you can see. You know, hold up the weight of his body so he wouldn't sort of just like slump over like he's melting. And I do think the dragon skin tin was nice. I suspect I probably could have chosen a silicone with an even smaller shore hardness. But that's something, if I do decide to give it a second go, I will research and consider in the future. I did have a little experience with dragon skin tin when making a mermaid tail, so that's sort of what made me lean towards the dragon skin. And of course, I love using all Smooth On products. I've had a lot of success with Smooth On in the past and other projects, and they're very good about providing information to help you research and decide. Things to keep in mind when pouring silicone and also the mold star is you need things that are sulfur-free, things that will not inhibit the cure of the silicone. So for example, instead of using duct tape, I used packing tape. Don't just use any old clay. Do try to use a sulfur-free clay. I know Plastilina works great. I've used that before, and the Monster clay this time also worked very well. I did think the Monster clay was a little bit hard when getting it out of the package, but I could kind of slice away pieces and sculpt it as I needed it, and just the warmth of my hand softened it. So I did like the Monster clay a lot. Yes, and another thing to remember is glue. That's part of the reason I decided on hot glue, is that I know hot glue will not inhibit the cure of the silicone or the mold, and I'm just not sure about other glues. Of course, if you're not sure, always do a test swatch. Do a little bit, maybe try to cure a little tiny bit of silicone on it. Just test things before you start doing big batches. I think it'll help you not waste so much materials. And yes, I would say the two biggest boo-boos in my process was the first time I was trying to just make a dump mold, and I was going to kind of cut the doll out of it. But of course, that all got ruined because I found out that 3D printed objects are extremely buoyant, and it really just kind of pulled away from the clay pour spout I had put on the back and just floated to the top of my mold. And at first I tried to press the doll back into the clay backing, back into the mold that was actively curing, but I realized that I was deforming the pour spout. I didn't know what was going on. Was the figure bumping edges of the mold wall? There was just so many issues, and I just had to kind of scrap that project and start over. Luckily, I was able to take that mold off of my doll, cut it into little pieces, and use it sort of as filler bits in my second mold. I think that worked really great. You can't tell really what's old mold and what's new mold. It all cured together very beautifully. And by making sure it was just fresh mold star along the doll, the 3D printed parts, I was able to still keep a ton of detail, especially in the face and the hands and everything. The second big boo-boo was just using enough ease release. I would give it 2 or 3 coats, and things were still fusing, and it was driving me crazy. And I ended up watching a video by Carolyn Dowdy, and she makes silicone baby dolls, and she just casually in her video mentioned making sure that it felt waxy and sort of rubbing and massaging the ease release into the mold. And I decided that I was actually going to use my finger and sort of massage into all the nooks and crannies of my mold and make sure it felt really waxy. And it actually felt like a lot of ease release was being used. And I don't know, maybe my mold was soaking it up. Maybe you need to be very particular and use a lot of extra. That way you don't fuse your silicone to your mold. it was pretty crazy, and that was sort of a learning bit too. And I think that is unfortunately part of the danger of curing mold or silicone, curing silicone in a silicone mold. That silicone to silicone always runs the chance of it curing together. But again, I was able to get 2 successful pours. Some of the parts that had boo-boos, I just touched up with some extra mold or some extra silicone that I mixed up. I just color matched it, kind of gave him some touch-ups where he needed to be beautified, and they turned out really, really well. I might go back and try another attempt at making their little gowns, but I am so very happy with the way they came out. They are very lifelike. You can see they have these nice like little chubby bodies. They have these, here we go, his sleeves are a lot shorter. They have these really great little hands and these very cute little feet. Chubby like little baby bodies. Here you go, he's naked for a moment. And they really are, they're very stretchy and lifelike. I have seen people insert wire, like armature wire, into silicone dolls to make them more posable. And they're honestly at a great point too where I could wash them, sort of prep them, wash them with dish soap, clean them all up, maybe clean them with a little alcohol, and you could mix up some very thin silicone, I think with like Psycho Paint or something. They have it on the Smooth On website. And you could even airbrush or just lightly paint some extra like pinks and browns into the doll to add more detail. I am kind of thinking about it, but I'm not sure I'm ready to invest in an airbrush. So that could definitely be something to work on, to expand on. And again, there was so much that I learned by making these, and I am very seriously considering giving it a second go. So we'll see. Anywho, thank you so much for watching, everyone. I'm sure you want to see lots of great pictures of the 2 of them. How cute are they? I think one turned out like a titch more like appley green. The other one has more of a minty color. And again, I think you can see the difference in the 30 and 40 millimeter eyes. And again, thank you guys so much for watching. I am so excited to have these guys and just keep watching season 2. Yeah, so please like and subscribe if you like this video. I have spoken.